Hello everybody. Hello. I know I know some of you only just traveled within the building, so thanks for coming. But for those that actually, schlepped through the cold, double thanks. So I'm gonna talk for just a little bit, and then hopefully we'll get into a little discussion. I'm gonna weave. Susan really reminded me that a lot of you are book people, and so I'm gonna weave I'm going to weave books throughout these next few minutes, and let me start by.
Can everybody hear Scott, by the way?
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. So the beginning of the Meetup story actually has something to do with this woman here. Now, this woman was my when I was a freshman in college at the University of Iowa. They had a required little freshman writing course, and this was the graduate student TA. And I wrote I wrote this. I was a crappy writer and still am a crappy writer, but I wrote this story that totally turned her on, and she gave me an A even though I didn't deserve it, because it was this personal story of how they really pull this out of you in your freshman writing courses, and you write stuff you wouldn't write about. And so I wrote about how my mother passed away when I was young, and she just wanted to hear more and more about this story. And even though I wrote the thing, she really kind of kept pushing me on it. Well, does this woman's face ring a bell to anyone in the publishing business? So her name is Hope Edelman, and she. Again, she was a graduate student, but then years later, she wrote a book called Motherless Daughters, which I guess to those in the publishing business know that was a huge hit. And now the fascinating thing about it is, fast forward, is I completely forgot about her, never thought of her, and although actually I do remember her, all these, this great conversations we had about. She was telling me about the importance of support groups and all these other things. And on our website here, it says, locate a motherless daughter support group. Well, that links to this, which is a list of all the motherless daughters meetups, all the motherless daughter meetup groups around the country and outside the country. From New Jersey to San Francisco, Boston, the Twin Cities. These are these support groups that, as a result of a book, there's now these communities. And if you go clicking around and seeing these different cities, this is Motherless Daughters Chicago, people saying they're thankful it was started, and it's nice to know that other women share the same feelings and going through what each other have gone through, to Washington, to New York City. And if you look what inside of what people are saying, what their experience is within these motherless daughter meetups, is they say that it's a great way to be understood and to talk about things which maybe no one else can understand. It's a safe haven, and people are searching for some type of support group, and they're grateful for it, and it becomes this important thing. Now, the important thing to think about here is this was sparked by a book. Now, clearly, you know that books have all kinds of impact on the world, and they can be these meaningful things. But how do you shorten? How can a book really spark this kind of community and this kind of help and this kind of support for people? It doesn't. Sometimes it might naturally and organically happen. It'll just sort of magically spring up. But what a big point I want to argue with you here today is that we're on the eve of a really important shift in the impact of books, or the impact of all kinds of media. In other words, how is it that any or all kinds of media can be a catalyst for community, for conversation, for collaboration, for connecting people in powerful, awesome, human, tear-jerking ways, and that it doesn't have to just be an accidental byproduct. So next, I'll come back to that. So the next sort of book story here is how Meetup actually started with a book. Meetup. For those that aren't so familiar, I'll talk about it more in a few minutes. But there's 1 million people joining a Meetup group every. All the Meetup groups combined get 1 million new members every 6 weeks, and so there's all these meetups. But it started with started with a book called Bowling Alone. So I moved from Iowa to New York 16 years ago. After that, a couple years after that class, and. I'm the last person in the world to have to be like Mr. Community or Mr. Local, caring about this kind of stuff, because I was knee deep into the internet, thinking that geography doesn't matter anymore, that local doesn't matter anymore, that we can be best friends with people around the world, and virtual is as good as real. But then, and I was living on Elizabeth and Houston downtown when 9/11 happened. And the funny thing happened that I talked to more neighbors in the 3 days after 9/11 than I had in the previous number of years in New York. And what were those conversations with neighbors? It was really just simple stuff, but it gave you the sense that people were looking after each other and people could turn to each other, and all the ways in which even people not just had the conversations in the stairwells and the elevators in the apartment building with people that they would normally not even make eye contact, but also people self-organized into really important support groups and ways in which they were helping each other out and all that kind of stuff. Now that but it felt like a city of neighbors, not just a city of strangers. And so the thought behind Meetup was, and Meetup is a 9/11 baby, because 9 months almost to the day after 9/11, we launched Meetup with a simple goal, which is how do you make it easy for people to self-organize a local meeting, a local gathering about anything, anywhere. And most of what people have used it for ever since is not what we imagined. And most of what we thought people were going to use it for, they didn't actually use it for at all. So, but it was after 9/11, it was like about 3-4 days after 9/11, I saw on a blog a link and a reference to this book, Bowling Alone. Are any of you familiar with this book? Yep, so it's about the decline of community in America. And I clicked on that link and I bought it on Amazon, and it talks about how this crazy research into how joining being an active part of a group of like a club of an organization in your town can have the same impact as quitting smoking on your health. That about 60 years ago, 40% of Americans were an active member of a local organization of some sort. It might have been a PTA. It might have been a women's group as part of like a church or synagogue or something. It may have been a union where you'd go to a local meeting. Guess what that 40% is nowadays, or in these past few years? 10. Actually down to like 2 or 3. Now you could say, well, who cares? I don't care about my grandfather's Kiwanis Club. And I would also say, for those that think, I know sometimes people, think of like me or Meetup as like this great, fighter against, Facebook and Twitter. No, I love Facebook. I love Twitter. It does create community of a certain sort, and it does keep you in touch with your friends and family. But the impact of only being surrounded by your friends and family, and increasingly, as Facebook powers the whole web, everything you do will be, as Mark Zuckerberg says, you'll be doing it with your friends. You'll look at Amazon and only see the books your friends are seeing. You'll look at CNN and you'll only see the news your friends are seeing. So if you are pro-life, you won't see what's outside of it. That bubble is going to grow tighter and closer and tighter. And when you interact with strangers less, you actually, it's a proven psychological fact, you then trust people less. And when you trust less, you interact less. When you interact less, you trust less. And and what you get out of that is a coarser, nastier, more contemptuous kind of world. And most importantly, I would say also, you lose a sense that people are powerful together. It's great that you've got your friends and family, but there's other sort of legs to that stool of how people, of what's important. So, all right, so we launched this website, and we didn't know what people were going to use it for, And a lot of people have heard that, like, crazy guys that no one had ever heard of, like Howard Dean, started using it for politics. What a lot of people don't realize is that he wasn't the only politician to use it. So this is a guy who who was a state senator in Illinois, and he decided he's going to run for Senate. And he does what every smart web designer should do today, which is start their website with "Welcome to our website." It's really important that you do that. And you can't see this too well, but he's got his little babies there, but what he does is he slaps up on his website Meetup, and he decided he was going to campaign by going from Meetup to Meetup to Meetup across the state of Illinois. As long as a Meetup got a certain number of people, he was going to go and show up. And so we have all this footage of this guy going from Meetup to Meetup, and then he became senator. Don't know whatever happened to him, but it's a good story. So now fast forward a few years. I'm giving you the kind of little Meetup 101 of just sort of how things work. So I had to go to Kansas City for something a couple months ago. And it was a Sunday, and I had a few hours to kill, so I landed on the plane. As soon as the wheels touched down, I opened my phone and I said, okay, are there any meetups that I might pop into in the next couple hours? And so sure enough, there are some meetups going on there in Kansas City. So I show up at this one. This really ruins the story because you got to see the picture. But basically, I went to the what is it? Oh, it's all right. Okay, the Laugh Out Loud Ladies Club of Overland Park, Kansas. Now, and so this is again a story. When I say people use it for things we didn't imagine they would use it for, and they I had no idea that there would be this whole category of just women who want to talk to each other on a Saturday afternoon about I don't know what the hell they want to talk to each other about. But and you also say, well, don't they have friends and don't they have family? Yeah, they have all that, but there's this thing about them wanting to, and I'll get into this in a second, about what do they really do at these meetups, and why is it so vital? Why do they show up, and why would they be so happy that some schmo will actually, that they'd be okay that I'd show up and take their picture with me? Now I went to 2 meetups. I went from that then right to another one. Now let's just give you a sense of the diversity. This is the live action role play sword fighting meetup that was also happening at the same time, a couple miles away. And hey, people need their outlet. So I was happy to join in for a bit. So since these past few years, Meetup isn't the hot new thing, but we just keep growing and growing and growing. There have been a million meetups in 2010, and to give you a sense of what these are not events like this. Events like this, thank you, Susan, are really awesome and wonderful. But the heart of Meetup is not rows. The heart of Meetup is circles, is people talking to each other, with each other, not a speaker and a presenter just kind of talking to you. And that's why the Starbucks is interesting. That even though it's only 1%, it is actually the #1 identifiable venue. So you think about, you want to think of it as these Starbucks everywhere, people popping in there. And so let me show you an example of 5 different meetups that have happened at Starbucks recently. One of them is a Southern California motorcycle meetup, and this is them in front of their Starbucks. And they say, nobody asks what you do for a living. The passion of riding becomes the most talked about thing. A delightful, warm group of caring people. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. It says, a divorced woman who was suffering from depression joined the group, went on several rides, and her outlook on life changed. This is the organizer telling the story of her meetup. Her therapist asked what happened. She said the only thing she had done different was joining this meetup. Now the therapist recommends Meetup to their patients. Another member, but it's this weird mix of people in every Meetup group. This same group here, war veterans who joined, say it helped them integrate back into society. What's also neat is that Meetups aren't just people talking to each other. It's a community forums, and they engage in all kinds of ways. So with the Starbucks in the background in the parking lot, they actually set up these regular days where basically people can just bring their bike and they'll work on fixing them with each other, which is great. Second example, this is another women's meetup in Yelm, Washington, wherever that is. That's at a Starbucks, and the organizer says, we are a group of women, all ages, who take some time just for ourselves, no husbands, no kids, no responsibilities, just fun. We get together for lunch, see a movie, check out events in the area, whatever. Third is, now this is the whole realm of professional meetups. Now, whereas there used to be industry organizations, where it used to be there was a publishing, organization where people where they would do what Susan's helping you do, which is connect with each other. Now that doesn't happen so much anymore, whether it's for publishers or whether it's for pet professionals. And so here these women, they say, I love the concept of collaboration and teamwork amongst pet professionals to create a local cooperative entity. Number 4, this is actually just a picture, because this gives you a sense of everything. I love this picture. This is a Filipino food, culture, and language meetup in Daly City, California. But if you look at all the faces, you'll see, it just says everything. This person's, ready to study. This woman brought her kid, and he's kind of lost. He's probably hitting on her. You don't know, like, the whole mix of what goes on when people come together is just really, really fascinating. Lastly, the Dayton Folk Music Sing-Along Meetup. They just take over the Starbucks, and they're like, they have this growing and growing community of like people of music, and actually I showed this to someone at Starbucks, and they were like, oh no, this is bad, this is trouble. But in fact, the Starbucks manager says he wishes he could come, that they would come to his store every week. Apparently, coffee drinkers like us. So, next. And I will get into what does this have to do with the future of books and the future of publishing, so the question is, what does media have to do with meetups? We are not media. Meetups are real life. They're communities. They're lives. They're relationships. Your friendships are not media. But what is the media connection? So an example. So this guy goes on TV and says, all right, viewers, this is Glenn Beck talking, go meet up with each other. And he tells people to form meetups. Now, this isn't really well known. Hasn't been written about much. But the Glenn Beck meetups turned into the Tea Party meetups, and the Tea Party meetups are the backbone of the whole Tea Party movement. So these 600 meetup groups, of consistent community where they've formed organization with real solid structure behind them, town by town by town. They're having 2,000 meetups a month in October. That's 66 a day, which is much higher than the average meetup group. And the meetings are structured and organized. And this is, you want to talk movement. This is, the Tea Party is probably the most strongest movement today. And you really have to ask why. And the why is that it's not just some top-down charismatic media figure. It's that it's from the ground up. It is a true grassroots thing. And these sort of sovereign, independent local groups are powering it. And that is something that a lot of sort of movement makers and thinkers and people who are trying to make real change, they are not thinking in terms of how are people actually powerful. So I'll come back to that in just a second. So we launched a brand new sort of experimental platform. We saw what Glenn Beck did, and we said, hey, what if it was really easy to create a meetup everywhere about something? So Glenn Beck's people, it was kind of complicated in how they did it. They sort of hack it in different ways, but here now they have this map of all those meetups, right? We said, well, what if it was really easy to create lots of meetups everywhere about anything? And so we began experimenting, and a few months ago launched a platform called Meetup Everywhere. Now, this was mentioned on A1 of the New York Times on Sunday, this past Sunday, which is this dumb iPhone game. Was on A1 because it's wildly popular, and in the story it talked about how the fans of this game are organized local meetups all over the place, And so here they are, with at least 723 cities. There's someone planted in every city saying, yeah, let's meet up and talk about this game. Now, I know you could say, like, what the hell would they want to meet up for? But, I don't know. Why would someone want to read David Baldacci? I don't know. To each their own. No offense to anyone. Now, also interestingly, last week, Willie Nelson decided, after he got arrested on his bus for pot a couple weeks ago, he decided he's going to start a new political party called the Tea Pot Party. And so he is using Meetup now to try to get people to organize that way. When the Colbert-Stewart rally happened, they did on the website for Jon Stewart's rally, it had a big little thing off to the side says, hey, if you're not going to be in DC, self-organize elsewhere. And so they did in lots and lots and lots of places. Actually, I don't know if this is the last example. One of the very first sort of experimental uses of how media was using Meetup a few months ago is when the oil spill hit. Huffington Post said to their readers, just at the bottom of a story, they said, now if you want to go talk about the oil spill with each other, go meet up with each other. And it happened in lots of places, and it was really fascinating. You can't see the picture here, and it doesn't matter. It is interesting, though. It's a bunch of people in a circle. Again, it's not rows, it's a circle. And what they say is in this town in Evansville, Indiana, as a result of the Huffington Post doing this little tiny thing, which is saying, like, go meet up wherever you are. People at Huffington Post never heard of Evansville, Indiana, yet they met up as a result of that article, and they say they're going to form an organization called Transition Evansville to focus on oil depletion and alternative energy. Again, what's the power of media? Is it just to get that standing ovation from your readers, from your audience? Or is it maybe to spark and to catalyze community and things to happen that you can't imagine? Let me give you a book example here. So on the day we launched this new platform, Seth Godin, who I know has been a part of this meetup once, he told his audience in a single blog. You know who Seth Godin is, right? Most of you. He's a writer of books about marketing and business. And he stays in touch with his readers really well. So he did a blog post, and in the blog post he just said, "Hey readers, go meet up with each other and talk about my latest book." And he said he would be so pleasantly surprised if they met up in 50 cities. Imagine 50 cities. But what happened? People organized in, actually this is now up to 1,000 places around the world. And it wasn't just, of course, New York and LA and the obvious places. It was the fact that there were 3 people in this town in Slovenia, and 3 people in Nairobi, and 3 people in this town in Japan, and 3 people in this town in India, that, it's the 3 people at the Starbucks that have this thing in common that, who knows, maybe they start a business together, maybe they just have a conversation that helps them out. But all it took was for Seth to just say, hey, go meet up with each other. Now, which I think is a model that you're going to see play out bigger and bigger in days ahead. So let me show you this. A month or two ago, Mama Oprah ran a little 14 seconds at a show she did about education. Oh, thanks, Susan. And
education and click on Meetup. You'll be instantly connected with other people in your neighborhood who want to brainstorm ways to take action.
Okay, so granted it was just this little blurb at the before the commercial, and she made people jump through all these hoops of first you have to go to Oprah.com, then click on this, then click on that. But 1,000 towns got planted, and I'm sure in most of those nothing of significance happened. But the fact that just out of that little 14 seconds, there are all these stories that popped up about a pediatrician in Chicago was able to find volunteers to read kids read to kids, that different little organizations got started, different actions, and people got engaged because the infrastructure for PTAs are dead, because the infrastructure for support groups are dead, and we have to kind of like if those are important things, the notion of just parents getting together and being powerful, it has to be restarted somehow. And I think that media, books, and is an important catalyst for that. So let me kind of just how are we doing on time?
Yeah, great.
Okay, so I'm going to sort of start the wind down here. What's the learning from? There have been 7 million meetups with 70 million RSVPs, and by the way, we're like a handmade, homemade, hometown New York City company. It's all we're a company of 80 people, even though there's been 70 million RSVPs. It's about half technology and development. The other half is sort of business and taking care of answering the 10,000 emails we get from Meetup organizers every week. But the key learning here is this, that is to look at the language of what do people say after they meet up. What happens after people meet up? We see the word let's a lot. So at this London Java meetup, they say, let's develop something cool together. At this business startup meetup in Buffalo, let's help each other out. Let's clean up the beach. Let's talk MS. Let's create a fabulous women's motorcycle community. So let's hear it for let's, here, right now. Let's hear it for let's. Really, that let's is so key, and I could just bore you with so many endless stories of what comes out of this. But it's that little spark of what prompts people to meet up with each other, and then once they do, most of the time, nothing of significance happens. But again, it's that possibility that great things come out of it that is, that keeps this all going. Now, I use this word community a lot, and I really want to frame that because it's one of the most overused words. There's online community. Community is used in a million different ways. What I want to just propose here is that it's not a community unless people are saying let's together. And let's doesn't mean like, necessarily do-gooder, let's, improve our community. That's another use of the word community. But let's being like just there's a flatness to the organization, and people, and out of it people are sharing their stories, and the stories of me turn into a story of we, and they say let's. A movement is communities. Now, I know that's movement is another kind of overused word. And you can say, well, there's a movement of, book publishers, publishing books like X, Y, or Z. Or, a movement is not a trend. A movement is not even a campaign. A movement is not like, just change. A movement is when people are really engaged in something, and that in different kinds of forms, communities come out, and that is, there would be no such thing as a women's movement, a suffrage movement, a labor movement, a civil rights movement, if there weren't empowered local communities. That you think it's just sort of that charismatic leader, but in fact, it's if you really dig into how it is that women came to vote. It started from those local women's groups. And those local women's groups were not even necessarily formed to say, hey, we're going to be a power, we're going to be a political power, or we are going to form a group so that women can vote. It was like women's groups that might have been social in nature, that then the conversation turned to, hey, how come we don't have the rights that we should have? And so, again, movements, the heart and soul of the movements are communities. No community, no movement, no conversation, no community. So again, you could say like, oh, like most meetups start when someone says, well, there's kind of a community. Like I started the New York Tech Meetup, right? Because everyone says, oh, the New York Tech community, the New York Tech community, the New York Tech community. Well, actually, there really was no New York Tech community. There was no conversations. I mean, it's a vague concept, but actually push people and say, all right, here's your context, here's your permission to talk to each other. Like the way Seth Godin says, okay, readers, here's your permission to talk to each other. And all these communities are emerging. actual conversation is required. Too often, I think people, they're looking at like community now as more of a fan or a follower model. You know, fans on Facebook or followers on Twitter, fans and followers are not a movement. You have to get them to self-organize, see leaders emerge out of that, and you want accidents and serendipity, luck, and all kinds of things to happen out of getting people to turn to each other. Lead your followers to lead. And I know some of you might be starting to get a glazed over look from what I'm saying, because you're like, yeah, that's nice what you're saying, but I work in publishing and I publish these books about this or that. I'm telling you, here's a specific prediction. There's going to be a day when every book in the Amazon catalog is going to have a Meetup button on it, or when you're reading it on your Kindle, at the end it's going to say, okay, do you want to meet up next Saturday with a bunch of people in your neighborhood who are also just finished this book? That would be great, and that's going to happen. And out of that will come community and will come like leaders, like again, think of my old Iowa writing TA. Who would have thought she writes a book about, the death of her mother, and then all these support groups pop out. So the most over-repeated and under-implemented quote in modern movement making is one that you've probably heard, which is, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Last couple thoughts here. There was a meetup that someone on my team went to, and this great line came out of it, which is that an audience will watch you lose, but a community will help you win. I'm going to skip over a couple things. All right, so wrapping up. There's this, this guy comes from France to America in the 1800s. He tries to figure out what's special about America that keeps, that makes for the good things in America. And he pulls out this, this line. He says, in democratic countries, the knowledge of how to combine is the mother of all forms of knowledge. And I want to sort of propose here that in the 21st century, the technology for how to combine is the mother of all awesomeness. The next wave of social media is not media. It's not, new ways in which you're going to keep cataloging your life more and taking more photos and storing more photos. And that the most exciting thing about the future is not TV on your phone. It's how 1 billion people will use their phones to be powerful together. So with that, I really take this as a specific call to action. Ask yourself, in whatever, and I know this may be really irrelevant to a few of you, but I bet it's relevant to most of you if you think about it, which is what's within your power in your work to be able to say, what audiences or what people can you reach? Can you help them turn to each other? The revolution that's going on is not about like, okay, what's YouTube's business model or what, or it's the fact that YouTube is getting people to turn to each other and turning away from big TV network. Facebook and Twitter, for all the inaneness of Facebook and Twitter, it's great. People are turning away from big media and they're turning to each other. They're entertaining each other. That's what Etsy and eBay, these are, people are selling to each other. That's what you're going to see with people, they're loaning money to each other. It's a really, if there's one thing to just really understand about the big shift going on in the world right now, it's that people are kind of increasingly turning away from big industry, turning away from big food, turning away from big industrialized, centralized everything, and turning to each other. That's the heart and soul of the internet. And I hope you do what you can to see it go forward. Thanks. Yeah.